to today's video. Today is Monday, June 3rd, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the status of abortion and abortion referendums that are set to hit the ballot box this coming November and the impact that might have on the 2024 presidential election. Now, if you remember back in 2022 when we focused very heavily on some key and crucial states when it came down to the gubernatorial races that were going to determine the future of many states and potentially even the upcoming presidential election. Well, the state of Michigan came at the forefront as one of the most important races when it came down to the 2022 midterm elections on the Democratic side for governor here. Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent governor, who has been long eyeing up potentially future office, her first true test was in 2022 when she ran against Tudor Dixon, the Republican nominee for governor. Now, Democrats were looking at Michigan as an area in which they were looking to see how well Gretchen Whitmer would actually perform. In 2018, she was able to defeat Bill Schuette, who was the incumbent attorney general in 2018, and came at a time where there was an incumbent Republican governor who had been quite unpopular following the Flint water crisis, amongst other things, that ultimately made the Republican Party in Michigan quite unpopular even after Donald Trump had won the state in 2016. And so when Gretchen Whitmer won in a blue wave year by roughly 10 points, while it was certainly an impressive margin, it wasn't anything entirely unexpected. The polls had suggested that Gretchen Whitmer was going to win by that amount until 2022 came around, and on election day, she led in the polls by roughly just 1 percentage point. Now, the ballot ended up happening. The voters ended up voting, and Gretchen Whitmer ended up winning by 10 points more than what the polls had suggested. She won by 11, and she was predicted to win by 1. But what we found in those 2022 result here from the state of Michigan is that the results were nearly identical to what we saw on Proposition 3, an abortion referendum that was put forth to the voters in Michigan that was heavily campaigned on by Democrats and Republicans. And what the abortion referendum did here was absolutely inflate the chances for Gretchen Whitmer to win and the amount of support that she would receive overall. It's sort of like a wild card here that Democrats put forth that requires Republicans who are running in a statewide elected office to be questioned by the media, requires them to answer to the media which side they are on when it comes down to this proposal. And Tudor Dixon, the Republican nominee for governor, probably was going to lose anyway. Gretchen Whitmer is a strong candidate and has a proven track record that in 2018 at least, she could do quite well. And what we knew was that just on baseline, she was a stronger nominee in a swing state like Michigan than we likely have seen for many of the other surrounding states, even if those candidates do end up winning. Gretchen Whitmer just fundamentally was probably one of the strongest Democrats we saw that election cycle. With that being said, Michigan Proposal 3 absolutely boosted her candidacy. And the reason for that was, again, because the Republicans had to campaign against an abortion referendum. What do we know about national numbers and swing state numbers? Roughly 2/3 of voters nationwide believe that abortion should be legal in most or all cases. In swing states, that number is roughly anywhere from 60 to 65%. It doesn't deviate too heavily because, honestly speaking, the American public, which is also very divided when it comes down to the national popular vote, also is reflected in these swing states when they decide that ultimately they believe that abortion should be a right for women. And so when you find Michigan Proposal 3 coming to the ballot box, these Republican candidates have to say, we're pro-life, we're against this proposition. And it is very rare that there are voters out there, they exist, but it is very rare that there are voters out there that say, I'm voting yes on Michigan Proposal 3, and I'm voting for the Republican who has actively now campaigned against Michigan Proposal 3, and in many ways, in many instances, we saw this in 2022, campaigned for a national abortion ban or believes that abortion should be restricted in some regard. And so that really was a slam dunk for Democrats in 2022. They weaponized this in a way that, was entirely expected and arguably speaking was exactly what Republicans did for the 49 years before the Dobbs v. Jackson decision was actually brought forth. Republicans had spent 5 decades campaigning on a pro-life agenda, saying to their voters and their constituents, if you elect us, we will go in and axe, abortion rights across the country. We will go in and overturn Roe v. Wade. Both sides of the aisle have absolutely partaken in this politicization of a women's health and reproductive issue. And that's because all of it has been decided by politicians in years past. And recently, you are now seeing that abortion referendums are largely seen as efforts here to constitutionalize abortion, to make them legal in states that might have very much Republican legislatures or Republican, lawmakers at the top that aren't even in the state legislature. There are many reasons to believe that abortion referendums are brought forth to the ballot, but we cannot ignore the electoral implications of them reaching the ballot box. Because in 2022, there weren't that many. They were in California, Kentucky, Michigan, Montana, Vermont, and Kansas. And there aren't even that much more in this upcoming election. But what they did specifically in Kansas and Michigan, and Kansas had theirs in August, but it was trickled down into the general election because the mainstream candidates had to take a stance on here. That Michigan and Kansas ultimately ended up electing their Democratic governors, despite Kansas being a state that Donald Trump won in 2020 by 15 points, won in 2016 by nearly 20 points, and Michigan being a state that Joe Biden only won by roughly 3 points. Gretchen Whitmer ended up winning by 11. We cannot ignore the electoral bump that Democrats get when voters are going to the ballot box with abortion in mind. It's a winning issue for Democrats because the majority of this nation and the majority of swing state residents agree with Democrats on this issue very heavily. It's an issue that Republicans just really cannot campaign on correctly. They don't know how to, and so they ultimately collapse. And so now tying this back, I know we've gone on a bit of a tangent here, but tying this back to the 2024 presidential election, think about what it might mean when we have abortion referendums on the ballot in 2024 in states like Pennsylvania or in states like Nevada or Arizona. Now, here's the thing. What we're looking for here in Pennsylvania is that it really just depends on whether or not this is actually going to happen. We don't know if Pennsylvania will have an abortion referendum this coming November. But what we do know is that there are efforts being done in states like Nevada, Arizona, and Montana, and I'll tell you why I mentioned Montana in just a moment, where they are looking to put forth an abortion referendum to get an abortion referendum on the ballot this November, and it just needs to cross the threshold. It just needs to be submitted to the Secretary of State's office. It just needs the verification of signatures in order to reach the ballot box. And once it does, this will go into full swing. Now, Democrats are being smart about this. When you take a look at who's actually funding, in some cases, these abortion referendums or giving the resources for these, a lot of the times you find they are Democratic aligned PACs. And while that certainly is on one end, because these Democratic aligned PACs tend to associate themselves with pro-choice candidates, with people who align with them on the issue of abortion, on the other end, there are some names that have, hopped back and forth between nonprofits and campaigns to focus on the issue of abortion, but also have come from Democratic campaigns and know exactly what this means for an election. It's sort of like Democrats are using this to kill two birds with one stone in some states where they want to make sure that abortion is codified, that this is something, in some cases, constitutionalized, might I add. Equally, they want it to be something that benefits them in an election. And so I think we need to be very understanding of the intentional timing of some of these abortion referendums. And Democrats are using it this time because you can't continue to do this over and over again. That's why we don't talk about it much in the state of Nevada, and we talk about it more in the state of Arizona, because for years now, abortion actually has been legal in the state of Nevada, and the Democratic legislature, which actually is controlled by a Democratic near supermajority, has maintained the legalization of abortion in the post-Dobbs era, even under a Republican governor, Joe Lombardo. And so Democrats take a look at that and say, you know what, this isn't as much of a prime issue as it is in a state like Arizona, which has abortion restrictions right now, is a red state, which did have a red governor, but the Republicans did change the laws in the immediate aftermath of Roe versus Wade being overturned. There were so many different things that came into effect. The Republican Supreme Court in Arizona now has ruled recently that this draconian law from the 1800s, before Arizona was even a state, can be enforced in the state, outlawing abortion with no exceptions for the life of a mother, no exceptions for anything else. I mean, this is what you see to be a problem when it comes down to electability and why there is a need for these things to hit the ballot box. And so Nevada and Arizona, it is no secret why we are seeing these abortion referendums pop up in those states. On one end, it is because they want to legalize abortion more so in Arizona than in Nevada, but also to benefit Democrats up and down the ballot. In Montana, it seems to be an effort here on one end because Montana actually has a very interesting history when it comes down to abortion. If you look into it, Montana is actually very big, freedom, independence. These states, even though they are Republican, oftentimes find themselves voting to legalize abortion because on this issue alone, they again align with Democrats. And so Montana equally has a very competitive Senate race coming up in 2024 that this abortion referendum would require voters in the state and candidates in the state to take a side on this issue, and you will often find the Republicans take the unpopular one. So Montana, Nevada, Arizona, what's happening here in Nebraska? Why is it purple here? Well, there are multiple measures that are being conducted in the state of Nebraska. They're deciding which one they're going to go forward with. There's 2 of them right now. The point is, though, they are gathering signatures too. Florida now has one. Colorado now has one. Maryland has one too. South Dakota has one. Now, Maryland has a competitive Senate race, but I don't think that's the intention, or that wasn't initially, it seems, of the intention of the abortion referendum that was put forth in the ballot there. In Colorado here, looks like they're going to be voting on abortion rights this coming November. That, again, will help Democrats. Florida will slightly help Democrats. I will say, though, Florida is really an anomaly. You don't find that these down-ballot measures end up helping Democrats as much as they do in other states. Help Democrats in Michigan, but in 2018, when you saw a legalization for marijuana across the state, you also saw a vote on whether or not convicted felons should be allowed to vote. And the voters said yes, and the Republican legislature said no. And so it'll be interesting to see exactly how that's taken in terms of approach this time around. I believe the Republicans ended up adding a poll tax. And so I think that's just such a interesting thing if you're picking up what I'm putting down. Point being, though, these are the states we're working with. And so on an electoral map here, you are seeing that Democrats have something to campaign on in Nevada. They have something to campaign on in Arizona. More so Arizona, again, than Nevada. It's certainly going to be much more of a prominent part of the 24 campaign season in Arizona than it is Nevada. I think voters there know that abortion is safeguarded in this state. There's much more of an imperative in states that have Republican legislatures. For instance, in Ohio, when they had to vote on issue 1, when they had to vote essentially on a proxy vote on the issue of abortion, pro-choice advocates won. That's because the state was very red. They needed to organize. They needed to really capitalize on this. But I wouldn't be shocked if Democrats used their political wit to go ahead and say, in Nevada, we're going to make this a thing. We're going to build this out. Right now, we see it in Arizona. We see the advertising for it. We see the campaign already branched out and ready to hit the ground running once those signatures are verified, actually in a very short period of time. Nevada, on the other hand, we have yet to see the full display of the campaign. But I will say, it will undoubtedly help Biden if Democrats step into it. Even though there is a perception there that abortion is legal, when you do campaign on ensuring that it is promised regardless of who's running the state, that's where you see it helping Democrats too. So Nevada, Arizona, Montana, Colorado, Florida, these are the states where you see these abortion referendums genuinely doing something in terms of shift. I think Florida less than the rest, but overall, there are going to be voters out there that will get out to the ballot box to vote on the issue of abortion that will also vote for Democrats because they're already there. We saw it in 2022. We even saw it in 2022 in the Michigan governor's race, but also in the August Kansas one, where voters who registered to vote for the sole issue of voting in this election. Many new voters that we saw pop up around August weren't just voting to vote in party primaries. In fact, a majority of them, it seems, based on media interviews and the way that we saw voter turnout really drive up amongst women when it came down to the abortion referendum, is that a lot of people in the state of Kansas, specifically voting in the pro-choice favor, were registering to vote for the first time solely and only to vote on this ballot measure, and then ended up that November, many of them ended up getting out to vote with the candidate that aligned themselves with the winning side of the issue on the ballot measure. And so that's exactly what I think Democrats are going to try to do now, except in many states, you are going to be seeing a combined ballot measure, presidential ballot and abortion referendum ballot, that is going to help the Democratic Party regardless. And so when I look at Arizona, when I look at Nevada, when I look at Colorado, when I look at Montana, I can see the reason why this could be helpful. Should it expand to states like Pennsylvania? Also, additionally, something that Democrats would be happy about. They're already on edge when it comes down to this state. I mean, you can take a look at my most recent prediction. Pennsylvania's lean blue. Colorado's likely blue. Arizona is tilt blue. Nevada is tilt red. There is reason to believe that the margins could be narrow enough in some of these states that an abortion referendum could make or break the campaign, could actually end up pushing Democrats over the finish line, or if it doesn't get the amount of signatures required, maybe, for instance, in Arizona, they overcompensated and they said, or overestimated, ended up stopping their gathering of signatures, and right now they've already announced over a month ago that they gathered enough signatures, and they're just continuing to do so on the off chance that they don't get the initial ones immediately verified. But, we've seen interesting things like that happen, and specifically if you look at Michigan, going off on a tangent here, but if you're ever bored, take a look at the 2022 Michigan gubernatorial race before Tudor Dixon was the nominee. She wasn't even in the running, really. She was in the bottom 5 of candidates there, but then 5 of their top candidates were disqualified for falsification of signatures. So that's a whole thing. Moving back to this point on the abortion referendum and the impact of it, I think we are going to find that in these states where the margins are so exceptionally narrow, think about the 11,000 votes that Trump won by in the state of Michigan in 2016. The 26,000 votes that Biden won Wisconsin by, right? Think about those very narrow instances where, hey, a fraction of a percent or a full percent could make or break an election that might have otherwise gone another way. And so right now, I will say, there is going to be, somewhat of a noticeable bump for President Biden. Should he narrowly win a state like Arizona? Obviously, a lot goes into that, but a piece of the puzzle is an abortion referendum. A piece of the puzzle for Gretchen Whitmer's victory in 2022 was Proposition 3. A piece of the puzzle for Laura Kelly's victory was the August primary combined with the abortion referendum that got, tens of thousands of new registered voters in that state. These ballot referendums do make an impact. They're not a permanent fix to democratic elections, though. You can only pull this card once a decade at most. The moment you codify it or constitutionalize it, now you need something else before the next election. Because there no longer is that active threat of abortion being overturned in a state. There is no longer that concerted effort from the Republican Party to try to put forth a new constitutional referendum because they know that it isn't going to pass. These things are sort of like Hail Mary cards. And right now it seems like Democrats are using it in 2024 to ensure that they win this election. But there should be considerations and conversations about future races where they won't be able to do it. But when we do narrow in on this individual presidential race, it is undeniable that Democrats will receive a bump. The question is, how large is that bump? Does it push them over the finish line, or do they still come up short? Only time will tell, and I am so interested to see what the answer might be. In 2022, based on that alone, Democrats might be hopeful. But of course, so many other factors are at play in the 2024 presidential election, and it's further out than it was when it came down to the Dobbs decision, which was months fresh in 2022, but will be over 2 years old in 2024. So all eyes looking at a lot of these races, a lot of these competitive states, a lot of these competitive ballot measures that could end up forcing Republicans to take unpopular positions and push them down further, not only on the presidential race or on the Senate race, but on down ballot representative races, potentially some gubernatorial races, and even going so far into state legislative and locally elected office races that you could find Republicans ended up losing because of their stance on the issue of abortion and taking an unpopular position on a referendum like this one. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.